Chapter 2011. Gume had agreed to it because she wanted Zhou Chengwang to give up on her. After she said that, Zhou Chengwang's eyes lit up a little. Gume's heart screamed, "Sai, don't try to seduce me," even though he did it unconsciously. There was a thirst in Zhou Chengwang's eyes. His voice was very soft. "I won't make things difficult for you. I just want to take a look." After taking a look, he would go back to be city and give up on her. Gume stood up. "Let's go." Zhou Chengwang first walked beside her, then followed behind her. Gume smiled and didn't say anything. When they reached the VIP ward on the top floor, Gume stood at the door. "I'll go in later. I won't close the door yet. You can leave after taking a look." This was all she could do. She knew a thing or two about Mr. Ye's methods. If Mr. Yi found out about what happened today, even if she didn't die, she would be skinned alive. Zhou Chengwang nodded. "I know." He heard what Gume said to him. He knew that Gume was Yi Muyun's subordinate, and he didn't want to implicate her. Gume nodded and pushed the door open. She didn't close it. Zhou Chengwang stood by the door and saw Cher from afar. She was lying on the hospital bed. Her face was a little pale, but she wasn't in bad spirits. He looked at her, and his eyes felt a little warm. They hadn't seen each other for a few days, and he realized that he didn't just want to see her. He really wanted to tell her that he liked her. Even if she didn't reply, he wanted her to know. But his rationality still won over his emotions. In the end, he still resisted. After looking for a long time, he still turned around and left quietly. But he didn't leave New York. He was still near the hospital. Occasionally, he would have the chance to see her again. At that time, Gume would push her out to bask in the sun. He didn't know if Gume had discovered his existence, but he did see her for 2 consecutive days. He watched her smile, watched her in a daze, watched as he didn't exist in her world. Yi Muyun stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window in the office on the top floor of Boyd New York Company. There were some photos scattered on the floor, all of which were taken at the hospital. Unbeknownst to Cher, she and Zhou Chengwang were in the same frame. Yi Muyun stood there for a long time, then slowly walked back to his desk, opened the drawer, and opened a document. It was information on Glory Enterprise. His slender fingers clenched as he dialed an internal line. "Come here for a moment." In less than 2 minutes, Guze walked in and stepped on a photo. He picked it up and was shocked. In the photo, not only were Zhou Chengwang and Cher, there was also Gume. It was easy to understand the cause and effect. Guze's fingers trembled slightly. He clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles almost turned white. Looking up, he said, "Mr. Yi, Gume is young and immature. Please forgive her this once." Yi Muyun sat behind the desk and looked at Guze quietly. "Gume is immature. As her brother, you should know how to make up for her mistake." He lowered his gaze and landed on the document on the desk. "Take a look at this document." He paused for a moment, then said softly, "I want Glory Enterprise to disappear within a month." Guze broke out in a cold sweat. If it wasn't for Gume, he would have been able to persuade Yi Muyun to take back his order. However, he didn't have a position now. He had no other choice but to obey. "Yes, Mr. Yi." Guze sighed in his heart. He didn't say anything else and took the document away. A bloodbath was about to happen in B City, but New York was peaceful at the moment. Chapter 2012. The black Porsche stopped slowly. Yi Muyun got off the car and closed the door. He walked towards the lawn. Yi Muyun saw a tall and skinny figure standing far away, but Yi Muyun acted as though he didn't see him, walking straight towards Gume and Cher. Cher was sitting in a wheelchair. Her legs were fine. She was looking at a few butterflies flying around in the flowers. They were very cute. Yi Muyun walked over naturally and leaned forward to kiss her little mouth. Although the kiss was sudden and Gume was there, he deepened the kiss after she resisted for a while. He pinched her little chin with his palm and forced her to kiss him. Snow had always been afraid of his kisses, but she was shamefully fond of them. Kissing and kissing like this, it was a little too much. She couldn't help wrapping her arms around his neck and pressing her body against his, making it easier for him to deepen the kiss. Gume felt helpless at the side, but she felt more sympathy. Sympathy for Zhou Chengwang, who saw his goddess kissing someone else, and the kiss was so deep. She didn't know that the matter was exposed. She didn't know that her brother was about to kill the family of the person she liked. At this time, Gume was still full of happiness. Even if she liked someone, she felt relaxed in her heart because she had never thought of getting it. She looked to the side inadvertently and saw Zhou Chengwang's face. That face, that expression, Gume would never forget it in her life, because it was so clean and pure, but it was stained with deep despair. Even a fool could see that Cher was willing. She liked Yi Muyun's kiss. She liked Yi Muyun kissing her. That scene was so beautiful that it made people feel ashamed. Gume's eyes fell on Zhou Chengwang all the time, watching him fall into deep disappointment and despair. Her lips moved, but she didn't say a word in the end. And Yi Muyun carried Cher horizontally and said to Gume in a low voice, "Go through the discharge procedures." Gume was stunned for a moment, and Yi Muyun had already strode towards the hospital parking lot. Wasn't she going to be discharged tomorrow morning? Gume thought in confusion. At that moment, her phone rang. It was Guze. She immediately picked it up, and her eyes fell on Zhou Chengwang's face. At this moment, he was also looking at her. Gume's face was slightly hot, but after a while, the blood in her body froze. "Gume, Mr. Ye's private plane will take off in an hour." Guze's voice was serious. "I know Zhou Chengwang is in the hospital. If you see him, tell him that Mr. Yi is going to deal with Rongwang." This was the only thing he could do for Gume. With just one photo, he could tell that the way Gume looked at Zhou Chengwang was meaningful. He thought about it again and decided to tell her, even if it would make it difficult for him to destroy the Zhou family. Gume immediately understood the meaning behind Guze's words. She was stunned for a moment before muttering, "Mr. Yi asked brother to do this? Is it because of me?" Guze didn't deny it. He just sighed. "Gume, you're very smart. You should know what to do." At this time, it was most important to protect himself. Mr. Yi's attitude was very obvious. He wanted him to make it clear to her Guze's side in his heart. This time, Gume was willful and didn't care about the overall situation. Gume was silent for a long time before she said softly, "Brother, can I beg you not to deal with the Zhou family?" Chapter 2013. Gume pursed her lips and didn't say anything for a long time. Guze couldn't stop worrying about his sister. His voice was calm as he said, "You know what to do, unless you don't want to live well." Gume's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't help but say, "Brother, I don't know." She muttered to herself, "But is it wrong to like someone?" With that, she immediately hung up the phone. Her expression was a little stern. Then, she set Guze as a user that was not allowed to contact. She quickly turned on her laptop, entered a set of accounts, and downloaded some information. As she did all this, her fingers were trembling, because she knew how terrible the consequences of betraying Mr. Yi would be. But when she did all this, she didn't hesitate. She didn't have the time to hesitate either. On the other end, Guze looked at his phone and was stunned. Then, he immediately dialed Gume's number, but Gume's phone was no longer in the service area. "Damn it," Guze cursed softly. He almost dropped the phone in his hand and immediately set off to look for Gume. But he couldn't find Gume. He sent her countless messages, asking her to pick up the phone, but they were like stones in the ocean. Guze understood Gume. They were siblings after all. He always knew what she had done in Boise. He quickly checked the company's information and found traces of theft. Guze was shocked. He drove all over New York, but couldn't find Gume. His heart slowly sank. He had no choice but to follow Yi Muyun back to Be City. But Gume had disappeared. Out of selfishness, Guze didn't tell Yi Muyun about Gu Mei stealing the company's information. He knew that Gu Mei had returned to Be City and was most likely with Zhou Chengwang. So he had to stop her before she did anything wrong. Before boarding the plane, Yi Muyun asked about Gu Mei. Guze said that Gu Mei would return to Be City first. When the private plane landed, Guze immediately returned home to look for Gu Mei, but Gu Mei was still nowhere to be found. He knew that Mr. Yi was already suspicious. Although he didn't say it explicitly, Yi Muyun already knew it with his insight. However, Mr. Yi didn't know that Gu Mei had taken away the documents. This was like a time bomb in Guze's heart. On the second week after returning to Be City, Cher had returned to her normal routine. At first, she went to class, But Gume was not by her side. Instead, another girl followed her. Cher recognized that it was another female employee in the company. Although she was dissatisfied, she didn't lose her temper because she couldn't find fault with the girl. Yimuyun picked her up after school that day. When Cher opened the car door and got into the car, the girl named Linya left by herself. After getting into the car, Cher pouted unhappily. Yimuyun placed one hand on the steering wheel and looked at her calmly. You like Gume a lot. I can't say that I like her that much, but she was the one who kept me company in New York. I'm quite used to it, Cher said weakly. Yimuyun looked at her with a burning gaze. After looking at her for a while, he said slowly, Then I've been with you for so long. Shouldn't you be more used to it? Cher looked at him pitifully. Her voice was also soft. That's different. Yimuyun started the car. What's different? Huh? After a pause, he said, Fasten your seatbelt. Chapter 2014. Yimuyun looked at the road ahead with a faint smile and suddenly held her little hand. Cher's hand tightened, and she felt a little uncomfortable as if she had been electrocuted. However, she didn't dare to break free and just stared at him. Yimuyun kept holding her hand. Her heart was pounding for a long time. About a minute later, his voice was clear and cold as he asked, Are you used to it now? Huh? Cher's voice was a little flustered. She then turned her head and looked at him with her heart racing. Yimuyun's fingers tightened and his smile deepened. He asked again, Are you used to it? Under his superior attitude, Cher lowered her face and said in a low voice, I'm used to it. Just used to it? He put on an even more pretentious attitude. Nothing else? The little girl lowered her face even more, and after a while, she murmured, I like Big Brother. He snorted. I didn't hear you. Cher was furious. Her voice wasn't soft. He must have deliberately said that she couldn't hear it. So she grabbed his hand and bit it hard. But she was really too weak. Even if she used all her strength, she couldn't move him at all. He just lowered his head and looked at her. Then he chuckled. Hearing him laugh, Cher was even angrier. She let go of his hand and ignored him. However, Yimuyun was fast. He put his finger next to her little teeth and forced her to bite it, teasing her. Cher was almost crying. In the end, she bit her lip and said weakly, I like Big Brother. At that moment, his sports car drove into the villa's yard, and he let go of her hand. However, when the car stopped, he unbuckled his seatbelt and looked at the little girl beside him. She refused to get out of the car. Yimuyun unbuckled her seatbelt and said tenderly, Why aren't you getting out, baby? Cher turned her face to the side. You're bullying me. Her face was indescribably red, and she refused to look at him. He looked at her and seemed to understand what she was thinking. He said in a low voice, Are you shy? She didn't say anything, so he pulled her face to his side and forced her to look at him. Her shy look was really cute. He gently pinched her chin and leaned over to kiss her. He kissed her lightly and coaxed her to open her mouth. The kiss was very lingering. After a while, he ended the kiss and kissed her eyelids. Baby, it's okay. Open your eyes. She didn't want to. She hugged his waist like a rascal and stayed in his arms. Yimuyun had no choice but to carry her out of the car. He carried her horizontally as he kissed her. So delicate. It was just a kiss. She was so shy. If they had sex in the future, she wouldn't want to see anyone. What about the future? He murmured against her lips. Just teasing her like this made him incomparably happy. He kissed her again and again, calling her a little fool. Cher was angry. I'm not a little fool. He carried her all the way to the main house. He didn't put her down even when Sisterly came over. He just said calmly, Dinner will be served at 6:30. With that said, he carried the little girl to the study on the second floor. Sisterly smiled happily as she watched the young master and young mistress go upstairs. Chapter 2015. Being hugged by him like that, Cher only dared to hit him lightly. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito's. Put me down. She was not used to him hugging her in front of others. At home, even though everyone knew about their relationship, she had always called him brother. It was a little strange to hug him like that. Yimuyun chuckled softly. I'm not letting go. Not only did he hug her, but he even lowered his head and kissed her. He kissed her gently on the lips. Every time he kissed her, her body would soften and heat up. She could not help but tremble as though she was being electrocuted. Cher's little hands hugged his shoulders. Her fingers brushed past his expensive shirt and gripped it tightly. She was so afraid, burying herself in his arms like a weak animal, allowing him to bully her as he pleased. In the end, he bullied her too harshly. Perhaps it was because he was too beastly. As he imitated the act of kissing her, back and forth, Cher did not understand why he was doing that. She only felt that his heartbeat had sped up a lot, and his body temperature was burning up. She moaned, but her moans were all swallowed by him. This kiss was so ferocious that it almost drowned her. He had never kissed her like that before. In the end, she was placed on the study table and kissed. Her petite body started to heat up slowly, and he did not just kiss her. He did something else. Cher was so scared that she cried out softly, "Light the lamp." In the evening, the lights in the study room were brightly lit. As her brother bullied her like that, she cried out miserably. Yi Mi-yoon was very distressed, but at the last moment, he still let her go. He was still standing. That little person was curled up in his arms, her little hand hanging around his neck like a rascal. She snorted softly. "Brother, you're bad." He bullied her almost every day now. She did not know why he liked to do that. Clearly, he did not seem to be feeling well at the end. He often went to the washroom, and that. Why did he have to do something so uncomfortable over and over again? Cher could not figure it out, but she did not dare to ask. She could only let him bully her. At this moment, she was crying hard, and her little body was hot. She didn't understand what was going on with herself, but Yi Mi-yoon knew. He reached out to help her pull up her clothes and chuckled softly. "I only like to bully my little idiot. I'm not stupid," she emphasized once again. Yi Mi-yoon laughed again. "Are you stupid?" His voice was extremely seductive. "How stupid is my little fool?" She was furious. "Little idiot, I don't want to talk to you anymore." As soon as he said that, he felt like biting his tongue. It was too embarrassing. Yi Mi-yoon kissed her little face. Silly girl. She was so angry that she cried out. He couldn't help but kiss and rub her. After a while, he finally couldn't help himself and went to the bathroom. Beloved lay on the small sofa, trembling. When he came out, she was still curled up there and had not come back to her senses. Yi Mi-yoon sat over and pinched her soft little face. He called her silly girl again with infinite love and picked her up again. Today, it seemed that he was not going to let go of her and was going to hug her until he fell asleep. Chapter 2016. Although Cher had a problem with it, she didn't dare to tell him. Especially since she had a request tonight. She wouldn't resist whatever he wanted to do. After eating downstairs, she finished her homework obediently and looked up at Yi Mi-yoon, who was behind the desk. He was handling work, and his gaze was focused. "Brother." She called out to him timidly, her voice strangely seductive. Yi Mi-yoon looked up at her and smiled. "What's wrong?" The little girl took the initiative to walk over and sit beside him, looking very obedient. He waited quietly, knowing what she was thinking. "Brother," she called out to him softly. Before she said it, she wrung her hands and said after a long time, "I want Gume to accompany me." He reached out to touch her little head and sighed. "Isn't this good? It's not bad, but I like Gume more." It was rare for Cher to beg him. She even took the initiative to sit on his lap and kissed his chin. She was very inexperienced in doing such things, but she knew that he liked it. She gnawed on the food in a disorderly manner like a puppy, but she succeeded in provoking his anger. However, Yi Mi-yoon still let her kiss him. He looked at her beautiful face quietly for a long time before he hugged her and kissed her deeply. He kissed her deeply. She was quite obedient at first, but she wasn't very cooperative towards the end and kept asking him to stop. "No." Her voice was soft. "Brother, I want Gume." After saying that, she looked at him shyly with tears in her eyes, angry that he didn't want her. There was a strange look in Yi Mi-yoon's eyes. His fingers caressed her red lips gently. After a long time, he said lightly, "Gume is a top talent. It's just temporary." He smiled and teased her. "It's a waste of my talent to accompany you to study." With that said, he rubbed her hair again. "Be good, and I won't let anyone follow you from now on." Compared to spending time with Gume, the fact that there was no one watching them was a bigger temptation. Thus, The little girl immediately betrayed her friendship and asked pitifully, "When will I stop following you?" Hearing her question, his gaze deepened. After a long time, he said softly, "After your birthday." Her birthday was only a few days away. Did Cher think this had anything to do with it? She didn't know that he was going to eat her on her birthday. After that, he wouldn't have to worry about her running away. She opened her round eyes as if she had some doubts. As a black-bellied man, Yumyun naturally would not tell her his dark thoughts. In order to divert her attention, he kissed her again until she was so tired that she almost fell asleep. After she fell asleep, he took a shower and returned to the study. He dialed the number and asked in a gloomy voice, "Guze, have you found Gume yet?" Guze was silent for a moment before he said, "She might be in a bad mood." Yimyun narrowed his eyes. "I heard that she's in City B." Guze didn't say anything else. From tomorrow onwards, Boy's database will be locked. Also, Guze, don't ask about anything else except for the acquisition of glory. Yimyun's voice was cold. Guze wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't have the chance to say a word. Chapter 2017. Guze clearly knew that Mr. Yi had taken away his authority. If Glory Enterprise couldn't be acquired or killed, his position as Guze's special assistant would probably come to an end. But between power and family, Guze still chose family. However, this didn't mean that he had betrayed Mr. Yi. He was just waiting for Gume to turn back. He spent a week on the preliminary work for Glory Enterprise, and it would take about half a month to destroy this century-old family business, if Gume didn't show up. On the other side, Yimyun hung up the phone and walked back to the bedroom. The little girl was still lying there, sweet and carefree. He sat on the bed and reached out to gently touch her cheek. He smiled gently, then lifted the quilt and lay down beside her. He pulled the warm little girl into his arms and kissed her. He smelled the milk fragrance for a while, then closed his eyes and fell asleep. Early in the morning, when Cher woke up, she was rolling in his arms. As soon as she opened her eyes, she saw his handsome face magnified. Cher blushed and looked at him eagerly. "Good morning, brother." In the morning, Yi Muyun had a kind of laziness that was different from usual. His black hair was slightly messy, and the collar of his pajamas was open, revealing his delicate collarbone. She stared at his beautiful chin in a daze, and further up, at his sexy, thin lips. She stared straight at him. Yi Muyun hugged her onto his body, and his voice was a little hoarse. "You want to kiss me?" The little girl sat in his arms, extremely shy. She had always been afraid of him, and she was even more afraid of him in bed. Now that they were in such a situation, she naturally refused, so she lay in his arms and refused. He coaxed her for a long time. Then his little girl moved her trembling lips to his face and kissed him lightly. When she took the initiative to kiss him, he usually wouldn't kiss her. He liked to see her shy look, to see the expression on her face when she leaned forward to kiss him. It had to be said that Yi Muyun was only 20 years old, but other than the cruelty of the business world, he had also learned some of the bad habits of men. He didn't touch women outside, but he came back to bully young girls. At this moment, she was kissing him. His gaze was almost burning her. She said softly, "Close your eyes." Not only did he not close his eyes, he even demanded that she open her eyes as well. It was too embarrassing. Little Milk Bun couldn't take it anymore and refused to kiss him anymore. She just lay down and hugged him shamelessly, refusing to let go. Yi Muyun smiled and let her go. He got up and went to the bathroom. Cher heard a shameful voice coming from the other side. She covered her ears and refused to listen. He was so shameless. Beast. After a while, the beast slowly walked out. His eyes fell on her face, and he smiled faintly. He began to take off his pajamas and change. Cher covered her little face again and ran to the bathroom with a red face. She even closed the door. The corner of Yi Muyun's lips curled up slightly. But the little girl immediately regretted it after closing the door, because the smell in the bathroom was really... Her face turned even redder, and her heart beat faster. Don't go out to change clothes after showering. She didn't expect that Yi Muyun hadn't left yet. He suddenly walked in while she was in the changing room. "Brother." She reached out to cover her body and looked at him eagerly. "Aren't you going downstairs?" Chapter 2018. His expression was gentle, as though he was a husband taking care of his wife. They were so young, standing together in the morning light. It was the most beautiful and innocent time of their lives. Even though they got together later on, they would never have such innocent times again. Cher resisted at first, but perhaps his gaze was too gentle, so she didn't try to escape. She cooperated with him and put on her clothes. She could vaguely feel that he treated her differently. She couldn't tell what was different. It was the same love, but it was different. There was something in his gaze that she didn't understand. She was conflicted at first, but she didn't think about it anymore. In her heart, she had already agreed to be with him. Even though she was afraid of him, she never thought that another man would appear in her life to replace him. She didn't resist, not because she obeyed him, but because she obeyed her own heart. The 18-year-old girl was always a little enlightened. When she looked at him, her heart was slowly stirred up by some deep feelings. "Brother," the little girl called out softly. There was an inexplicable hint of love in her voice. Yi Muyun reached out and ruffled her hair. He bent down to be eye level with her. Cher blushed as she looked at his elegant face. "After your birthday, call me Muyun." He smiled slightly and kissed her on the lips. Cher was still in a daze. After a long time, she asked why. He sighed in his heart and ruffled her hair again. "Because we will be engaged. Our relationship will be different in the future." This was the first time he said this to her. Cher was a little surprised. She let out an "ah," and then her mouth was slightly agape. She couldn't speak for a long time. Her expression was especially cute. Not willing, his voice was gentle. He didn't act like a superior like before. Or perhaps he had entered a new way of interacting with her. In his heart, he had already treated her as his little wife. Cher covered her face with her hands. Only then did she realize that this was the reason why his attitude had changed these few days. She slowly put her hands down and looked up at him. He was so good-looking. She was afraid of him, but she really liked him. She bit her lips, and after a long time, she lowered her eyes and spat out a few soft words. "I'm not unwilling." In this short minute, Yi Muyun experienced the greatest ecstasy in the world. His body was almost stiff as he kept looking at her. After a long time, he slowly held her in his arms. His movements were unbelievably gentle, as if he was carrying a fragile treasure. Cher buried her head in his arms. After a long time, she called out softly, "Muyun," but after saying it, she felt awkward and asked in a small voice, "Can I still call you brother?" He lowered his head to look at her. She looked up at him, her eyes sparkling. Sighing, he reached out to stroke her little head. "Let's talk about it later." She was only 2 years younger than him, but his excessive protection made her look like a child. He really shouldn't expect too much from her. He pressed his forehead against hers and stayed like that for a while before carrying her downstairs for breakfast. Sisterly looked at the young master and young mistress. They were different from before. Her heart was filled with joy, and she kept persuading them to eat more. Cher's little face was blushing. Chapter 2019. Yi Muyun pinched her soft face and smiled. "Let's go pick out a dress and an engagement ring." Engagement ring? Cher's heart pounded again. Was he really going to get engaged? Why did she feel that it was unreal? She was only 18 years old, and she was going to get engaged? While she was in a daze, Sisterly said happily, "That's great. I'll ask someone to decorate young master's bedroom in 2 days. It'll be more cozy." The layout of the Pei Garden was very simple. It was a 4-story villa. Tang Yu and Pei Chi-Chi lived on the 3rd floor, while Yi Muyun and Cher lived on the 2nd floor. However, the master bedroom was for Yi Muyun. The meaning couldn't be clearer. Young Master Yi would inherit the Tang family in the future, including Mississippi sister Li was very happy. She was already thinking that there might be a little miss or young master to hug in a year or 2. Seeing that young Master Yi was full of vigor, she was afraid that he wouldn't be able to control himself sooner or later. Sisterly was experienced. How could she not know that young master was in a hurry to get engaged? It was probably because young master couldn't control himself anymore. Without a title, young master wouldn't do anything. With a title, everything would be a matter of course. She said it so blatantly. The little idiot and boss Ye's family understood and hurriedly said, "No need, no need." She couldn't finish her words because her little hand was held by him. Yi Muyun looked up at Sister Lee and smiled. Then I'll have to trouble Sister Lee. He was going to ask someone to design it and redecorate it, especially to hang their photos. How can you say that? After Sister Lee left, the little girl bit her lips. You will misunderstand. He looked at her little face and smiled, then said slowly, "It's not a misunderstanding." At this time, he was holding her and feeding her milk. He said slowly, "Because I'm going to live together after I get engaged." The little girl was a little absent-minded. "We are living together now. We'll have sex," he said simply, without any hesitation or beating around the bush. Shwe. Was stunned, staring at him blankly. He sighed and called her a little fool. Then, he pulled her into his arms and whispered in her ears, "I want you, the complete and utter kind." Shwe blinked and subconsciously called out, "Big brother." He nibbled on her little ear and whispered a few words to her. Her little face turned red, and she buried herself in his arms, refusing to come out. And he was smiling very happily, as if he had never been so happy before. After breakfast, he drove her to school. When she got off the car, Yumin got off with her and stopped her. "Wait a minute." Shwe stood still, her eyes sparkling as she looked into his eyes. He walked around the front of the car, right in front of the crowded school entrance. He held her little face and kissed it. His voice was a little hoarse. "After we get engaged, we'll take half a year off from school and—" Cher's voice was a little dazed. "Huh," he chuckled. "I'm going to the French branch for half a year." He was still holding her little face. "You don't want to go?" Cher didn't know where she got the courage from, but she resisted in a low voice. "I don't want to be luggage." He smiled and pinched her soft cheeks. "You're the accompanying family member. How can you be luggage?" Accompanying family member. Those words made her blush again. She didn't know how many times she had blushed today. She pursed her lips and nodded. Chapter 2020. Yi Muyun smiled and kissed her on the forehead again before letting her in. He opened the door and got in the car, leaving B University slowly. Cher walked into the school. She was in a good mood because she didn't have any followers. She was even a little excited. She felt that everything was wonderful, and she was especially happy. She had almost forgotten about the unpleasantness between them when she arrived at the classroom. She walked over and sat down. Zhang Sini, who was sitting beside her, forced a smile. "You're here." Cher nodded. Seeing that Zhang Sini's gaze was still on her face, she hesitated for a moment before saying, "I'm getting engaged in a few days." Zhang Sini was shocked and just stared at her. Cher smiled. "It's true. So you don't have to worry about me and Zhou Chengwang. It's not about you and him, it's—" Zhang Sini's voice was anxious and fast. That's because, before she could finish, a slender figure stood at the classroom door. "Classmate Zhang, come here for a moment." Zhang Sini was stunned for a moment and then looked at Zhou Chengwang in a daze. It had only been a few days, but he had lost a lot of weight. The school knew about what happened to Zhou Chengwang's family. As for the one who bought glory, there were rumors that it was Boyi. And the only one who had a grudge against the Zhou family and Boyi was the high and mighty Mr. Yi. So when Zhang Sini heard the news, she couldn't help but want to ask Tang Cher about it. She was the instigator, and she should be responsible for it. Now that she was interrupted by Zhou Chengwang, she was unhappy. She felt that Zhou Chengwang was not worth it, but she was in no position to say anything. Cher looked at the people inside and outside the door suspiciously. She realized that everyone was looking at her in a strange way, and her good mood was instantly gone. She didn't say anything, but picked up a book to write and draw. Zhang Sini couldn't take it anymore. She looked at Zhou Chengwang and said in a sharp voice, "Zhou Chengwang, take a good look at the kind of girl you like. Your family is like that, but she can still draw peacefully. She doesn't have a heart." Her sharp words seemed to have broken a spell. Everyone stopped moving. Some things, when exposed, are usually very ugly, just like now. Zhou Chengwang's face was pale. He narrowed his eyes and grabbed Zhang Sini's arm. He dragged her out and said, "Don't say another word. It's not her fault." After Zhang Sini said it, she didn't intend to take it back. She was dragged away by Zhou Chengwang, but she still said angrily, "Why didn't you let me say it?" It's clearly because of her that your family is facing bankruptcy. Look at her. She's like a little idiot who doesn't know anything. Actually, she's the cruelest because she only loves herself. No one else loves her. Zhang Sini was satisfied, but she was slapped in the face. Zhou Chengwang's face looked terrible, and his voice was hoarse. I told you not to say it. Zhang Sini covered her face. After a while, she asked softly, "You hit me?" Zhou Chengwang, you know that I like you. If you like someone, they have no obligation to like you. Zhou Chengwang's tone was very indifferent. It's just like how I treat Tang Xie. She has no obligation to like me. Zhang Sini was stunned for a long time before she chuckled. Zhou Chengwang, you're so silly. Now you can only save your family's business by telling her the truth. Chapter 2021. Xie finally understood. There was something wrong with Zhou Chengwang's family business, and it had something to do with her brother. She looked at Zhou Chengwang for a long while before asking softly, "Is it true?" Zhou Chengwang looked straight into her eyes and said indifferently, "I've said it before. This has nothing to do with you." Xie pursed her lips and said nothing more. She packed her bag and walked out quickly. Without thinking twice, Zhou Chengwang broke away from Zhang Sini's hand and went up to grab hold of Xie. "Where are you going? It has nothing to do with you." Xie's voice was slightly cold. "Move aside." She had never been so cold to anyone before. But from now on, she could not get close to Zhou Chengwang anymore. Her heart was thumping wildly, but she still put on a calm front. Right then, Zhang Sini went up again and looked at Zhou Chengwang. "Don't stop her. I think she'll pay for her mistake. And you're innocent." Zhou Chengwang spun his head around fiercely, his gentlemanly face filled with indignation. "What did she do wrong again? Do you have to target her like this?" Zhang Sini's face looked a little embarrassed. After a while, she chuckled out softly. "That's right. She didn't do anything at all. It's because she has a good brother that she could get first place even if she failed her exams." Zhang Sini's expression was a little crazy, as though she was going to throw caution to the wind. But no matter what, the school still took away your first place. A fake is a fake. When she said that, she thought that Xie would be embarrassed. However, Xie laughed out instead. Looking at Zhang Sini's confident yet self-abased face, she chuckled and said softly, "Do you know why you got first place again in the end? Do you think it's because you're excellent?" Xie chuckled. Or did the school leaders find their conscience? She had never been so sharp before, but looking at Zhang Sini's confused expression, she felt extremely happy. "That's because I begged my good brother to give you the first place." Zhang Sini's face suddenly turned pale, and she was extremely embarrassed. However, Xie was not done yet. She continued, "Zhang Sini, believe it or not, as long as I don't make things easy for you, your grades will never be in the top 10 of the grade." This meant that her excellence would not be recognized. Zhang Sini was very clear about the blow to herself. And scholarships. She needed them. The two of them, who had shed all pretense of cordiality, stood face to face, no longer as close as they used to be. "You're despicable and shameless," Zhang Sini said after a long time. Xie's lips curled into a beautiful smile. "Compared to you who turned yourself into such a hateful person for the sake of a man, I'm nothing." As she said that, she turned around and walked outside. As she walked, she said in a calm and crisp voice, "From now on, Zhang Sini, if you interfere in Zhou Chengwang's matters again, I can guarantee that you will disappear from City B." With that, the surrounding students were stunned. In the past, although Tang Xie came from a noble family, she had always been a naive and sweet girl. She did not speak and was gentle and quiet. Unexpectedly, that was not the case at all. There were already people whispering, how could a child from such a family be naive and sweet? Chapter 2022. Look, this is the aura of a wealthy family. Zhang Sini is far from it, someone said secretly. Many people agreed, but Xie didn't care about this. She quickly disappeared into the hallway of the school building. Zhou Chengwang's expression was ugly as he left slowly. Zhang Sini stood there awkwardly. So she had regained her first place because Xie had backed down, not because the school valued her. How ridiculous was that? At that moment, Zhang Sini realized the importance of power. One day, she would climb to the top of the pyramid. Cher walked out of the school and hailed a taxi. Half an hour later, she arrived at the headquarters of Boyi. All the employees there knew her. Seeing her, they escorted her up. Guze was a little surprised to see her. Then he smiled and said, "Mr. Yi is in a meeting. Do you want to wait in his office?" Cher looked at him. Her voice was a little stiff. "I want to see him right now." With that, she walked to the door of the conference room and pushed it open. Guze didn't stop her, because the consequences would be worse if he did. Obviously, the little princess of the Tang family was going to lose her temper. When Cher pushed the door open, Yi Muyun was in the middle of the meeting. He was stunned when he saw the little person at the door. Then, Mr. Yi was in a daze. His secretary reminded him softly, "Mr. Yi?" Then, her incorruptible Mr. Yi stood up and said calmly, "Manager Fong, continue with the meeting." With that, he walked to the door. He took her with one hand and closed the door with the other, closing the room full of gossips. "Why are you here?" The young Mr. Yi held his future wife in his arms and walked slowly to his office. Along the way, they met many people who could see how gentle Mr. Yi's expression was. This was completely different from the iron fist Mr. Yi had in the company. Cher's little face was tense until he took her into his office and let her go. She couldn't help but ask, "What's going on with Glory Enterprise?" Yi Muyun was pouring tea. When she heard what Mo Tinga said, she smiled lightly. "Why are you asking about this?" He continued to pour the water calmly and passed it to her. His gaze was deep as he said, "You seem to have rushed over. You didn't even attend class?" He suddenly nodded in understanding. "There's no need to attend this class." Indeed. Cher's heart went up and down. She looked at him and said slowly, "That's not what I'm talking about. It sounds like you're different from before." Yi Muyun looked at the cup in her hand and said calmly, "Drink the water in the cup first." It was rare that Cher didn't listen to him. She was still looking at him. "I don't want to drink. I want to know now. Are you buying Glory Enterprise?" Cher pursed her lips and asked in a low voice. Yi Muyun held the cup in his hand and looked straight at her. His voice was indifferent. "Yes, Guze is busy with this." "What's wrong?" He said it so casually. Cher's eyes widened slightly as she stared at him. "Why do you want to deal with him?" "Him?" Yi Muyun smiled lightly. He sat on the sofa and looked at Cher as if he was amused. "Why do I want to deal with him?" Cher's little face was still tense. "You know." Chapter 2023. Cher couldn't find any fault with him. She bit her lip and said, "Can you not do it? Not do it?" He smiled. "Of course I can, but I can't do it for the company's benefit." Schwerer's attitude softened. She slowly walked to his side and hugged his arm. "Big brother, just think of it as doing this for me, okay?" Yi Muyun looked at her deeply and asked her softly, "Do you think it's appropriate for you to beg me for someone else's sake?" As he spoke, he gently pinched her little face, but there was no sign of anger. Cher turned her face away. "You know it's not like that." "Then what is it?" His voice was full of tension, which scared her. "Is it because you're guilty?" She turned her head again and looked at him with wide eyes. She was no match for him. He had grasped her weakness and could coax her with a few words. "Be good. This is not a child's play. It's not my decision to buy Glory." Cher didn't believe him. Yi Muyun looked at her and smiled. He suddenly walked to the desk and pressed the intercom. "Guze, come here." In less than 2 minutes, Guze came. "Tell her about the process of the company's decision to buy Glory." Yi Muyun's voice was indifferent. Guze smiled. "I was the one who suggested it." Then Guze made up a story. It was so perfect that even Yi Muyun couldn't help looking at him. It was Guze's loss not to go to the Chinese Academy of Drama. Cher was stunned. Had she wronged him? Wasn't it her brother's idea to buy Glory? She was a little stunned and couldn't come back to her senses for a long time. Yi Muyun gestured for Guze to go out first. After the door was closed, he got up and pulled the little girl into his arms. "You're not angry anymore?" Cher was still in a trance. After a long time, she said, "Then can I?" In the end, she was not confident and her voice was soft. He sighed. "Baby, I can't." He caressed her long hair and said in a hoarse voice, "Listen to me, okay? This has nothing to do with you. That's how the business world is. The strong prey on the weak." She had no room to say anything else. She couldn't make a fuss in the company over this matter. Although she was young, she knew this. Originally, he wanted to leave. He didn't care where he was going. He just wanted to leave. But since she was here, how could he bear to let her go? Let's have lunch together. I'll send you to school in the afternoon. He pinched her little nose. You're so angry. Cher was a little unhappy at the thought of going to school. She snorted softly. I offended someone at school. Naturally, he had to ask. When she said it, Yi Muyun smiled faintly. If you don't want to see anyone, tell me. It's not that serious, but am I too arrogant? She raised her little face and asked him. He caressed her long hair and chuckled. Our Cher deserves to be arrogant. With that, he held her little face and kissed her. At first, it was a gentle kiss, but then it became a little fierce. She stumbled and fell on the sofa, and his body was soon on top of hers. Chapter 2024. This kiss slowly changed its flavor. At first, Cher resisted, but later on, she hooked her fair arms around his neck and curled her feet up shyly. Her fair and tender legs were extremely alluring. Cher, I can't help it anymore. At this moment, other than his desire for her, there was a lot of darkness in his heart. He was afraid that one day, she would find out that he was not as perfect as he looked. At this moment, he wanted to get her so badly that she would be his. But in the end, she was still too young. He could not bear to, but he did not go through with it. In the end, he was just one step away on the sofa in the office. The coffee-colored sofa was a mess. It was almost unbearable. Cher closed her eyes slightly and panted. She did not dare to look at him. Yi Muyun was not any better. His breathing was messy. He exhaled with difficulty and hugged her carefully in his arms. He helped her button up one by one. Cher nestled in his arms and bit her lips. When she called out to him, it was a little flirtatious. Brother. He knew that she wanted to beg him again. He smiled faintly. Other than this, I can agree to anything else. Cher lowered her head. After a while, she said, I got it. He did not agree. So, the little girl was not happy during lunch, but she did not beg him anymore. In the afternoon, he sent her to school personally. She did not know that when she went to the classroom, Yi Muyun went to the office. When Cher went to class, everyone in the class looked at her strangely. She didn't mind it at all as she walked back to her seat. She drew and slept. Everything was the same as before. Her mental fortitude is unparalleled. This is natural pride. Zhang Xini is far from it. A female classmate laughed. She laughed at Zhang Xini's wishful thinking. Why did she have to go against Tang Cher for Zhou Chengwang? No matter how outstanding Zhou Chengwang was, to put it bluntly, he would not marry someone like Zhang Xini. One must know that men were visual creatures. A woman like Zhang Xini was simply unattractive. Now that she had offended Tang Cher, they guessed that Zhang Xini would not be able to survive in school. After a while, Zhang Xini was called to the office by the teacher. When she came back, her face was full of anger, because the school leaders actually wanted her to stay one grade back. The point was that she was only in her first year. Where could she stay? To put it bluntly, he wanted her to avoid Tang Cher and not make Tang Cher feel uncomfortable. Repeating a year was the mildest way. If she was unwilling, she would have to quit school. Zhang Xini was angry and made a scene in the office, but it was useless. No one listened to her. When she saw Tang Cher lying there drawing, she felt a surge of anger in her heart. She walked over and said coldly, Are you satisfied now? Shue, or looked up at her. Zhang Xini scoffed coldly. I've stayed one grade back. Are you satisfied now? Cher seemed to have understood it. However, she did not show any goodwill towards Zhang Xini. Instead, she chuckled. I've never liked Zhou Chengwang. I really don't know where your hostility towards me comes from. If you don't like him, why did you send him to the infirmary? Zhang Xini asked aggressively. Cher lowered her gaze. Have you forgotten? You were the one who dragged me to watch the game. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been hit by the ball. Everyone looked at Zhang Xini with a strange gaze as they whispered among themselves. Chapter 2025. Sometimes you have to pay the price if you want to take advantage of others. Cher looked at her. Not everything is taken advantage of by you, right? Zhang Xini glared at her fiercely. So this is your true face. What true colors? Cher mocked. Do I have to count the money for you after you sell me out? Is that what you call being kind? As she spoke, Cher packed up her books, slung her backpack over her shoulder, and left. She walked straight to Zhou Chengwang's classroom. She wanted to find Zhou Chengwang just to make things clear to him. There had never been anything between them. She would bear what she should bear, but she wouldn't admit what she shouldn't. But Zhou Chengwang had quit school. Cher was shocked when she heard the news. She stood in the hallway for a long time. She knew that Wang couldn't keep his hands on Bo. Although her brother said that it had nothing to do with her, she still felt uneasy and guilty. Zhao Zi looked at Cher and said coldly, "Don't look for him. You'll only hurt him." Cher was stunned for a long time before she looked up. "Doesn't he want to learn piano?" Zhao Zi sneered. "If he can't keep Wang now, he won't be able to go to New York to learn piano." "I see." Cher's voice was calm. "Thank you for telling me this." Zhao Zi looked at her back and pursed his lips, but he didn't tell her the truth. A figure appeared next to him. It was Zhou Chengwang, who had disappeared with a paper box in his hand. "Thank you, Zi." Zhou Chengwang's voice was calm, and his eyes fell on the girl in the distance. Zhao Zi looked at him and said nervously, "Are you still thinking about her? Why didn't you tell her that you went to New York?" "That's why Wang was suppressed." "What's the point?" Zhou Chengwang smiled helplessly. "Zi, you don't know how Yimuyun handles things. If you continue to pester her, Wang will only die more miserably." Zhao Zi gritted his teeth and said word by word, "Tell her that there's another situation where she can stop Yimuyun. We can't stop it, not even her." Zhou Chengwang smiled. "The plan to acquire Wang has been implemented, and the funds used should be billions. Even Yimuyun himself can't treat it as a child's play and stop the acquisition just because he says he doesn't want to. That man, if he was not ambitious, how could he stand at such a height at the age of 20? Zhao Zi fell silent. Zhou Chengwang patted him on the shoulder. "Thank you for today. In the future, don't say anything in front of her. I was the one who pestered her and caused all this." "Chengwang, you." Zhao Zi, he didn't know what to say. Zhou Chengwang closed his eyes. "Zi, look at the sunshine outside. It's so nice. There must be a way." He opened his eyes and looked at Zhao Zi. "I'll think of a way. Even if he had to sacrifice everything, even if he had to destroy the dream in his heart, he couldn't give up on his family. He couldn't care less now. He wanted to stand at the same top as that man. At that time, would he not be forced to give up his dream and the girl he liked?" Zhao Zi looked at him and forced a smile. "Chengwang, I hope you can play the guqin again one day." "I will." Zhou Chengwang smiled. "I will, Zi." Chapter 2026. In the office on the top floor of Boyi, Yimuyun sat behind his desk. He looked at his watch and said to his secretary, "Time to get off work." The secretary was smart. She smiled and said, "Mr. Yi, you can buy a bouquet of flowers. Little girls like flowers." Yimuyun looked at her and didn't say anything. The secretary took out her phone and waved it. "I know a flower shop that has a good bouquet. I'll order it. Can Mr. Yi pick it up when you get off work?" Yimuyun didn't think and said directly, "Okay." However, he still chose a bouquet of lily of the valley. The secretary ordered, "It'll be ready in half an hour. Mr. Yi can drive by now." Yimuyun took his coat and went out. The secretary closed the door and heard Mr. Yi calling the little girl, so she went to the elevator on the other side. Yimuyun dialed Cher's number. She answered quickly, "Brother, where are you? I'll pick you up." His voice was very gentle, and there was a faint smile on his face. Cher lay on the bed and ate an apple. She grunted slowly, and there was nothing strange in her voice. Yimuyun hung up the phone with a faint smile and walked out of the elevator. When the car arrived at the flower shop, the shop assistant had already wrapped the flowers. When she handed them to Yimuyun, she said with a smile, "Lily of the Valley is very suitable for young girls." This probably pleased Yimuyun. He smiled faintly and put the flowers in the front passenger seat. When he started the car, he looked sideways for a while, and the corners of his mouth curled up. When the sports car drove back to Pei Garden, he got out of the car with the flowers. Sister Lee came over and said softly, "You're back so early. What happened?" Sister Lee was usually very concerned about the young couple, so she couldn't help but be a little worried. They were about to get engaged, so there wouldn't be any more trouble, right? It's okay. He comforted Sister Lee with a faint smile and walked up the stairs. When he reached the door of her room, he looked at her two little feet dangling. The little person was reading a manga, and there was a freshly gnawed apple core on the bedsheet. He couldn't help but laugh. He walked over and lay on his stomach, covering her from behind and kissing her ear. "What are you looking at?" "Nothing." The little girl immediately moved the manga in her hand down, using her body to block him from reading it. Yi Muyun smiled. She held her down with one hand and didn't let her move. Her other hand reached out to take her book. Her book was under her body, so the process was hard to describe. In the end, she gave in and begged with a blushing face, "Big brother." She handed the comic over to him. Yi Muyun sat up and placed the flowers in his hands and her arms. He flipped through the comic with a calm expression and asked indifferently, "Do you like it?" Cher looked at the flowers in her hands and was a little dazed. In the past, he would always give her food, small cakes, desserts, and so on. She really liked it. Whenever she ate, he would watch from the side. This was the first time he had given her flowers like this. She couldn't say whether she liked it or not, but she felt that their relationship was different. They had lived together for more than 10 years. A long time ago, she was like his possession. Now that they had suddenly become engaged, she wasn't used to it, but he seemed to be adapting well. Chapter 2027. "Do you like reading this?" he asked softly. Men and men. Cher didn't think about anything else, nor did she notice that the man beside her was looking at her like a wolf. "Then can you tell me what's with men and women?" He asked her like a superior. Cher was dumbfounded. She looked at him and couldn't say anything for a long time. "You don't even understand men and women, and you still want to read men and men, huh?" He put down the comic in his hand and looked at her. Cher was immediately indignant. She pouted and snorted softly. "Then how did you know?" "Of course I know." He looked down at her. "Do you want to try?" His voice was calm, but there was a hint of tension in it. Cher was a little scared and stammered, "No, I don't think so." She knew that if he said try, he would go through with it. Although they had slept on the same bed before, and he liked to kiss and nibble her, he hadn't done it to the end. She heard that the first time was very painful. Cher's face suddenly turned pale. She bit her lip and looked up at him for a long time before she asked softly, "Brother, we're engaged. Will you?" She couldn't say the rest of the words because it was too embarrassing. Yi Muyun was also stunned. He hadn't expected her to ask him that directly. A moment later, he lowered his head and kissed her little mouth. "Baby, don't you want me to do this?" She didn't say that she didn't dare to. She lay in his arms for a long time before she asked, "Will it hurt a lot?" Yi Muyun was startled again. Then she smiled faintly. "The first time will probably be very painful, but I'll be gentle." Cher looked up and bit her lips so hard that they were about to bleed. "Don't you know how to do it too?" Yi Muyun's gaze became a little unfathomable. He held her little face and didn't allow her to escape. He looked into her eyes and asked her softly, "Baby, do you want me to do this with others?" "I'll teach you when I have experience, huh?" She shook her head without thinking. She shook her head furiously and hugged his waist. She said in a low voice, "That's so dirty." He smiled happily and coaxed her naughtily. "Then I'm not dirty. Does that mean the baby will do anything?" Cher looked at him blankly, not understanding what he was talking about. Then Mr. Yi whispered into his future wife's ear, lecturing her naughtily. After listening for a while, the little idiot covered her ears and refused to listen. He was too naughty. Yi Muyun smiled even more happily, stroking her hair and calling her a little fool. He couldn't help kissing her for a while. In the end, he didn't touch her because she was too young. When the two of them lay on their sides, he stroked her little head and said gently, "Let's go out for dinner later. I've already ordered dinner." His fingers gently caressed her little hand. "Let's go pick out the matching rings together, HM." Cher's heart was beating fast as she looked up at him. She still felt that it was a little surreal. Her parents weren't around, and he was the one who decided all these things. However, she couldn't refute him. Perhaps she even felt a little happy. In the midst of her happiness, she still felt a little uneasy. She asked softly, "Is there any hope of returning to glory?" She even acted coquettishly, hugging his arm and swaying it gently. Brother. Chapter 2028. He pressed her little head into his arms and kissed it. Be good and listen to me. What will happen to Zhou Chengwang if Wang is acquired? Cher buried herself in his arms and asked with much difficulty. Actually, she knew that she shouldn't have asked. After all, it would make Zhou Chengwang's life even worse, but she still couldn't help but ask. After asking, she looked at his handsome face. Yumian thought for a while before answering her. His tone was gentle. It won't affect him much. Wang will naturally get a sum of money if it's acquired. The Zhou family will still be able to live a carefree life. Cher let out a long breath. If that was the case, she would feel less guilty. She wasn't very familiar with Zhou Chengwang, but she still didn't want him to suffer too much if he was involved in it. Really? She was still worried, so she asked again, when have I ever lied to you? He smiled and asked her in return. Cher replied with an, oh, and didn't say anything else. He pulled her up. All right, let's go out for dinner. Her clothes were suitable, so he didn't waste any time and carried her into the car. Cher thought that he would bring her around first, but she didn't expect that they would go straight to the restaurant. Sitting in the empty restaurant and eating a candlelit French meal, she knew that he had prepared this meticulously. Her little heart was beating fast. Do you like it? He placed a red rose at the tip of her nose and pressed his body against her back. He covered her eyes with his palms. Now guess what I'm going to give you? Cher's heart was beating very fast. She could roughly guess what he wanted to do tonight, but he hadn't said anything. Moreover, she had just experienced those things in the day, so she was feeling a little complicated now. Her entire body was curled up in his arms. She couldn't see anything but the warm breath on his palms. It was as if Yi Muyun was the only one left in the world. At least, in her world, that was the case. I don't know. Her voice was slightly trembling, and he immediately guessed that she actually knew. His baby was never stupid. Yi Muyun smiled, one hand still covering her eyes. The other already opened the brocade box, took out a plain white gold ring, took her hand, and slowly put it on. He did all of this without asking her if she could or not. He did it directly, just like how he usually did with her. Shua, but did not struggle. When that ice-cold ring appeared between her fingers, even a young girl like her felt a slight ripple in her heart. Baby, I'm proposing. He didn't let go of her eyes. He just held her little hand and whispered in her ear. Cher bit her lips and said in a flirtatious voice, You didn't beg me at all. There was a hint of accusation in his voice. Yi Muyun chuckled and let go of her eyes. He leaned sideways on the dining table and looked down at her. Baby, do you want me to beg you again? Under the dim light, a pair of figures appeared. Accompanied by the gentle piano music, it was extremely moving. Cher looked into his eyes and suddenly didn't want to struggle anymore. She slowly held his fingers and rested her little face on his knee. Just like that, they quietly and beautifully snuggled together. At this moment, she seemed to understand a lot. She understood his love, understood his long-term companionship, and understood his persistence towards her. Chapter 2029. Yi Muyun's gaze was deep. After a while, he took out a man's ring from his pocket. It seemed to be a pair with hers. He gently placed it in the palm of her hand, as solemnly as if he was handing over his life to her. Cher looked down at it for a while, then looked up at him before putting it on for him seriously. After she put it on, she said in a low and messy voice, You have to treat me better in the future. Don't bully me. Also, I'm afraid of pain. The little girl stood up and stood in the middle of his body. He was leaning against her, so they were much closer. As she said that, she tiptoed and kissed his chin. Finally, she moved to his lips and said in a low voice, Brother, are we going to be like this forever? It was rare for her to be enlightened, and she expressed her love for him. Yi Muyun's heart was boiling hot. It was an indescribable feeling after a long time. He held her little face and deeply kissed her, kissing her until her little body softened in his arms, looking obedient. The kiss finally stopped, but he was still pecking at her little mouth. His voice was hoarse as he answered her question. I'll always be good to you. I'll bully you. Also, I'll be gentle at the beginning. His idiot wasn't stupid anymore. She teased him. You said you will bully me. You said you will be gentle at the beginning, but will you be very fierce later on? Her little hand hugged his arm as she said hatefully. As her brother, he coaxed her for a while, but he was also satisfied with teasing her like this. In the end, the candlelit dinner was all wasted. He carried her on the table and kissed her tenderly until she couldn't take it anymore. And the pianist had already left wisely tonight. He seemed to want to give her a beautiful memory. They didn't eat French food. He took her to eat skewers, but he didn't let her drink too much. He only gave her a small glass, and he drank quite a lot. After drinking, he took off his coat and only wore a black shirt and casual pants of the same color. He was so handsome that the young ladies around him couldn't help but look at him. After looking at him, they blushed and their hearts raced. Cher drank some wine and felt uncomfortable. So she sat on his lap and ate, enjoying her brother's care. Actually, it wasn't a good scene to see such a big girl sticking to someone, but when they were together, it was very pleasing to the eye. Of course, he knew that she was like this because she had been drinking. Usually, she would hide from him. However, he really liked the feeling of being cared for and liked by her. He allowed her to be like this, serving him carefully as though there was no one else around. When they left the barbecue restaurant, he was carrying her on his back. The little girl drank a little, so she acted coquettishly and acted cute, as if she had no legs. However, all of this was because she was jealous. Yi Muyun carried her on his back and walked outside for half an hour to sober her up. Then, he took her to play video games and watch a movie. He was very good at playing games. She looked at him with his jacket draped over her shoulders and asked him how long he had been playing. And this was Mr. Ye's answer. It was his first time. Cher deeply felt that her intelligence had been insulted. The people around her were all. She stood there obediently and pouted. Brother, you won't have any friends like this. He smiled and came down from above. He leaned against her and said, I only need you. Chapter 2030. The impact of his words was too strong. Cher was still in a daze for a long time. She wanted to ask something, but he had already dragged her out of the arcade room. He wrapped his arms around her and walked forward. Let's go watch a movie. In his arms, Cher bit her lip. We didn't even manage to have a candlelit dinner. We played a few places. I'm so tired. He smiled and lowered his head to look at her. You didn't have fun? Cher shook her head and said gloomily, No. I just felt that something was missing. At this moment, he had already reached the Ferris wheel in the amusement park. They were standing side by side. After that, the crowd seemed to have lessened. The lights on the Ferris wheel lit up instantly. It was as though this was the only place that existed in the world. The night breeze brushed past her little face and blew away the alcohol. Perhaps she had never been drunk tonight. She just wanted to be drunk for once in his arms. It wasn't that she wasn't happy. She just wanted to have more. And now, he was going to give it to her? With the neon lights behind her and his clear eyes in front of her, Cher felt that the whole world was nothing more than this. I don't know how other girls feel when they're proposed to, but I think that because you are my baby, my little yellow bun, it should be a little grander than others. Because others can't love you like I do. Yi Muyun said words that she had never heard before. Then, he knelt down on one knee right in front of her. The stars and moon lost their color in an instant. He was holding his entire world in front of her. It should be his entire heart, his entire soul. He was finally giving it to her in its entirety. In this kind of night, just the two of them. He insisted that she should be the only one who knew about this. Cher lowered her gaze, her body trembling slightly. They had been together for so many years, but he had never once said that he loved her. She knew that he liked her, knew that he doted on her, knew that he was strict with her, but he didn't know that he loved her. She thought that he had already given her what she felt was missing. So, it wasn't that she didn't care. She cared a lot about this. Cher, please let me give you everything. He opened his mouth slowly and lowered his head to kiss her white, slender finger that was wearing the engagement ring. He kissed it gently, even with a hint of humility. Between them, he had always been the weaker party, but she had never known. Never. She had only to stand there for him to come and stand beside her. Cher slowly placed herself in his arms and wrapped her fingers around his waist. Her voice was a little soft. I only want you. I don't want anything. I don't want anything else. Because with him, there would be the whole world. Her words were the best words of love. Yi Muyun trembled as he kissed her. Under the Ferris wheel, he kissed her again and again. The huge Ferris wheel behind him rotated slowly, freezing time in this beautiful night. He kissed the love of his life in the night wind. In the end, they didn't watch the movie. He directly brought her to the presidential suite of the GM Hotel. At the front desk, everyone saw that Mr. Yi had brought the little princess of the Tang family to the hotel. Everyone's hearts were a little fuck. How old was Cher? There was still more than 10 days before her birthday. Was Mr. Yi going to start nibbling on her now? Chapter 2031. Cher was afraid. When she was carried into the presidential suite, she was pressed against the door and kissed. This kind of kiss was different from before. It was filled with urgency and a man's desire. She was trembling in fear, but she could not resist him. The kiss deepened. The night was getting darker. Kiss after kiss, test after test. Behind the door, he forced her to kiss him and do shameful things to him. The young man was about to go crazy. This was far from enough, but that was all he could do. He resisted the last part and planned to leave it for the night of the engagement. The young man was about to go crazy. This was far from enough, but that was all he could do. He resisted the last part and planned to save it for the night of the engagement. The young man was about to go crazy. This was far from enough, but that was all he could do. She put on her bathrobe and curled up in his arms. Her body was covered with the hickeys that he left behind. It hurt a little when she moved. Yi Muyun had settled it himself. At this moment, he was hugging her peacefully. He did not want to sleep. Thus, he dimmed the lights and looked at her little face with a warm yellow light. She did not sleep well and was woken up by his kisses. He bit her little ear and coaxed her gently. Under the Ferris wheel, say what you said again. She was sleepy. She whimpered and did not cooperate. But he really wanted to hear it. So he tortured her and did not let her sleep. Cher bit his shoulder. You said you would be gentle, but it hurts so much. Yi Muyun laughed and kissed her little mouth. Baby, I'm not really here yet. She blushed and buried her face in his neck. Shameless. In fact, they were just one step away. They had done everything else. Her fingers tangled with his bathrobe, and she obediently said what he wanted to hear, as well as those 3 words. Actually, she did not know if her feelings for him were love. But other than him, she really did not want anyone else. So this should be love. She thought that he would let her go after hearing it. But instead, his blood heated up. He kissed her for a long time and forced her to go to the bathroom with him. Cher was exhausted. She cried and begged not to get engaged because it was too tiring. In the future, I'll be the one who's tired, okay? You could just lie down. Yi Muyun's voice was filled with joy as he whispered some nice words into her ear. His smile was like a spring breeze. But she couldn't hear anything. She only knew that she was like a little milk bun nestled in his arms, humming and rubbing against him. That night, he was satisfied. He had the whole world. She didn't know that he wanted to give her the whole world, not just him. Yi Muyun and Cher didn't wake up until 10 in the morning. When she woke up, Yi Muyun was still there. He didn't leave the bed, but he just sat on the bed and used his laptop to deal with work. She stared at him for a while, wondering if he would feel bored. Other than work, the only thing in his life seemed to be her poor brother. Thinking of this, she stuck out her tongue with a mischievous expression. Yi Muyun tilted his head and looked at her. He closed the laptop with one hand and placed it aside. He hugged her with the other and kissed her. What do you want to eat? Shwe. Bit her lip and leaned against his neck. She whispered into his ear, I want to eat big brother. She was actually just talking about a kiss. But Mr. Yi thought of something else. Chapter 2032. Cher stared at him blankly, unable to comprehend the deeper meaning behind his words. Yi Muyun kissed her little mouth and smiled. She didn't continue to tease her. He held her with one hand and called for breakfast with the other. Then he hugged and kissed her. Brother. The girl's voice was seductive. Someone will come later. She was always very shy, afraid that people would notice something. And Yi Muyun was a man, so he usually didn't think so much. That was probably what he meant. The more shyly she struggled, the more he wanted to bully her. After kissing her for a while, he still felt that it was not enough. He hugged her in his arms again. His warm little body was very close to hers. He teased her for a while, but it also made him angry. The waiter came and knocked on the door. She immediately lay in his arms and refused to come out. Im Yoon chuckled, took her off his body, and walked to the door to open it. After opening the door, the waiter was stunned. Im Yoon was wearing a bathrobe, and his collar was loose. The waiter could see a few obvious scratches on his chest, which showed how intense it had been. However, the waiter of the hotel was also experienced. He pushed the dining cart into the living room and said, "Mr. Yi, please enjoy." Yi Min gestured for him to leave and walked back to the master bedroom after the door was closed. His silly little thing was still curled up on the bed like a little animal, which was a bit ridiculous. He walked over and sat on the bed, holding her waist, and said, "Are you waiting for me like this?" "No." She continued to lie on the bed. "You're shameless." Her brother smiled happily and looked at her. Being shameless is better than not being able to, right? What did he mean by not being able to? That was too shameless. He hugged her and told her what he meant by not being able to, and she was so ashamed that she kept struggling in his arms. Then he told her what he meant by being able to. Shui Air's face was bright red from his teasing, and her body was trembling slightly. The scariest thing was she felt that she, too, wanted to be with him. It turned out that she also desired her. This was what she was most afraid of and ashamed of. Later on, no matter how he teased her, she would hug his waist and act coquettishly. "What's the matter, baby?" he asked her in a low voice. The little person lay in his arms and said in a small voice, "Brother, I'm afraid." He still wanted to do something, but she pressed down on his hand to stop him from moving. It was too shameful. Last night, the feeling of the huge waves crashing into the sky made her extremely afraid. She was extremely helpless. She did not know that she could do that. When he touched her, she felt as if she were laying herself out in front of him. She was ashamed. Yi Muyun lowered his head and kissed her. He coaxed her, "Baby, it's me. Don't be afraid. I'm the one doing those things to you." The little girl was still hiding in his arms, not letting him touch her again. He was good-tempered and did not force her, continuing to hug and coax her. After she calmed down, he carried her to breakfast and fed her on his lap. She was obedient. His expression was gentle. The scene was beautiful and quiet. "Let's not go back today. We'll stay here for another night, okay?" He fed her one last mouthful, his voice very calm. The little girl's eyes widened, and the little girl would not know about Mr. Ye's dark thoughts. In Pei Garden, he had to be careful. Just like last night, she cried so hard. If they were in Pei Garden, he really could not bear to do it, but it was different here. Chapter 2033. "I don't want to." Cher snorted and threw a tantrum. As her brother, he would naturally coax her. "There's a dinner meeting at the GM Hotel today. Are you sure you want me to run back and forth?" Cher looked at him and said, "Then I'll go back alone. But we have to sleep together at night." His voice was gentle and full of coaxing. His little girl ignored him. "Then, should I look for someone else?" he asked with a chuckle. Then, his silly little girl lay on his shoulder and bit him hard. She snorted and said, "No." Although he was bitten, his heart was tender. He lowered his head and asked, "Baby, why not?" She lay in his arms childishly. "Because I won't." Then she hugged his waist tightly, a little domineering. Yi Muyin hugged and kissed her for a while. Then they changed clothes together. She played games on her phone while he continued to deal with work. She would look at him from time to time, and she knew that he had taken time to accompany her today. In the hotel, it wasn't just about what he wanted to do, but also about being together without being disturbed. The little girl felt a little sweet. She jumped out of bed and poured a glass of water for him. She said in a soft voice, "Brother, drink some water." He looked up at her and smiled. He took a sip and put it aside. Then he held her in his arms. "How can I do things if you keep looking at me like this, huh?" "I'm not." She struggled to get down, but he kissed her for a while before letting her go. It was a sweet day. When it was dinner time, he ordered her a favorite meal and took his laptop to the office next door for a meeting. "So there really is a meeting," Cher closed the door and mumbled. She was about to sit down and eat when she saw Gume. Gume. Cher looked at her in surprise. Why are you here? Then she looked a little dreamy. Brother asked you to come back, didn't he? She affectionately went over and was about to hold Gume's hand when Gume's voice was a little cold. No. Cher was stunned for a moment. Gume paused before continuing. I've already left Boyi. Why? Cher sounded hurt. Is it because I don't treat you well? Gume shook her head. She looked at Cher and said softly, Cher, I have a favor to ask of you. Cher was puzzled. What happened to Gume? Boyi is buying Glory Group. I want to beg you to ask Mr. Yi to stop this plan. Gume said, biting her lip. I'm begging you, okay? Zhou Chengwang is innocent. He didn't do anything wrong. Zhou Chengwang? Cher stared blankly for a moment before muttering. Does this have anything to do with Zhou Chengwang? She finally came back to her senses and quickly said, I've asked my brother. He said that the acquisition of Rongguang has nothing to do with Zhou Chengwang at all. He said that it was planned a long time ago. So you believe him? Gume smiled faintly. Then she took out her phone and opened a website. The contents of the letter caused Snow's face to turn pale. Boyi's acquisition of Glory Group started when she was hospitalized in New York, and the executive was Gu Zhe. That meant that Gu Zhe was in New York, so the order must have been from her brother. Chapter 2034. Cher was stunned. She was in a daze as she tried to digest Gu Mei's words. In fact, she didn't want to believe it, but she knew that Gu Mei had no reason to lie to her. After a while, she shook her head. I don't know. Gu Mei, only you can save Rongguang now. Mr. Yi is trying to ruin Rongguang. If the company goes bankrupt and becomes insolvent, the person in charge of Rongguang will go to jail. Gu Mei pressed Cher's arm. Cher, as long as you talk to Mr. Yi, he won't disagree. Not necessarily. Cher's voice was a little weak. She looked at Gu Mei. If it's so simple, why did you betray brother? Gu Mei was stunned. She didn't say anything. How'd Cher know? After a while, Shui said softly, Gu Mei, you know that if Big Brother agrees, I will have to sacrifice some things. For example, I won't be going anywhere and I'll just be by his side. For example, I'll have to endure the life of a bodyguard. Do you think it's worth it for Zhou Chengwang? Gu Mei closed her eyes. But he's doing this for you. Cher, he only likes you. He didn't hurt you. This isn't fair to him. Then if I give up my freedom, will it be fair? Cher asked softly. Gu Mei couldn't answer. Gu Mei, let me think about it. Also, don't let brother know that you've looked for me. Otherwise, you'll be in deep trouble. Cher's expression was a little indifferent. This was because Gu Mei was someone who had betrayed Bo Yi. She didn't have much warmth to give Gu Mei. Yes, at critical times Tang Cher, wasn't a flower in a greenhouse. She wasn't a little cutie that Yi Muyun protected. She was Tang Cher, Tang Yu's only child. Gu Mei was stunned for a moment. After a while, she said softly, okay. She knew that from this moment on, her relationship with Cher was no longer simple. She also knew that it was unreasonable for her to come here today. Cher was right. Why did she have to pay such a price to help Zhou Chengwang? It was all because of her selfishness. She left with her fingers on the doorknob. The voice of a young girl came from behind. Gu Mei, you should go back. Otherwise, I won't let you off. At this moment, Gu Mei's heart ached. No matter how cold Cher was, she was always concerned about her. But there's no turning back for me. Gu Mei turned her head and looked at Cher. I've fallen in love with Zhou Chengwang. Cher's eyes widened in disbelief as she mumbled, Gu Mei. Gu Mei lowered her eyes. Cher, that's ridiculous. I like him because he likes you. Cher wanted to say something, but her throat seemed to be blocked. She couldn't say a word. She just looked at Gu Mei like a moth flying into a flame. The two of them were silent for a long time before Gu Mei said softly, I'm sorry, and thank you. With that, she walked out quickly. Cher stood there, her whole body cold. She thought of the sweetness of the past 2 days. Was all of this built on Zhou Chengwang's pain? She stood there for a long time. She didn't eat much during the meal. She wanted to ask Yi Muyun, but as she had said, if he agreed, she would have to pay the price. If Zhou Chengwang was fine, then she wasn't. Chapter 2035. She was still in a daze until Yi Mu-yun returned to the suite. What's wrong? Yi Mu-yun took off his tie, rolled it up, and put it aside. He walked into the bathroom to wash his face. When he came out, he found that she hadn't touched her dinner, so he frowned. Is it not to your taste? I'll order another portion. He picked up the intercom and was about to dial it when Cher put her fingers on the back of his hand and said softly, I don't want to eat. He looked at her and smiled. What's wrong? Are you not feeling well? He wanted to put his finger on her forehead, but she avoided it and said quickly, Nothing. Yi Mu-yun looked at her and seemed to think for a moment before he smiled. Has anyone been here? No. Her heart was beating a little fast. I'm just a little tired. She didn't want him to know about Gu Mei. Perhaps Gu Zhe could persuade her to come back. Before everything went wrong, Gu Mei still had a way to turn back. Cher found that she was more worried about Gu Mei than Zhou Chengwang. After all, Gu Mei used to be the one who took care of her. Go to bed early if you're tired. Yi Mu-yun didn't force her. He went to the bathroom, and when he came out, she was already lying down. He lifted the quilt and lay beside her. Naturally, he couldn't let her go so easily. Unexpectedly, she didn't resist. This passionate affair lasted for an hour. During this hour, he kissed her like fire and tormented her. When it was over, he carefully helped her wipe it. Although it didn't really happen, both of them were a mess. She closed her eyes and felt his breath. When he wanted to leave, she hugged him. Brother. She called his name in a completely vulnerable manner. She put her little face on his shoulder and said in a low voice, Brother, I only have you. There's no one else. His body stiffened. Who was Yi Mu-yun? Even if she didn't say it, judging from her strange behavior at night, someone should have been here. He smiled faintly and asked, Did someone say something? He sat up a little and leaned against the headboard. He looked at Xiao Fu's head in his arms and gently rubbed it. I guess it's Gu Mei, isn't it? No, she blurted out in denial. However, her denial came too quickly and became transparent in front of him. What did she say to you? Yi Mu-yun smiled faintly. About Glory? Or Zhou Chengwang? Cher buried her face even deeper into his chest. She wrapped her arms around his neck and said in a low voice, Brother, just take it as doing this for me, okay? It has nothing to do with you. Yi Mu-yun's voice was slightly forceful. Glory's acquisition will greatly improve my position in Boyi. If I give up now, Cher, do you know what it means? Throwing billions into the water was a disgrace to his career, and he would not be able to take over Bowie in the future. Then how could he be her husband? Cher actually knew what he was asking her. She was a child of the Tang family, after all. She knew these things. But brother will have a way, won't he? She wanted to beg him. She leaned against him and said very softly, I can give it to you now and have sex with you. This was his greatest safeguard. That was what the naive Lin Sanjiu thought. But she didn't expect it to be an insult to Yi Mu-yun. Chapter 2036. Cher was still hugging him. No, I just want to tell you that I don't have anyone else, and I don't like anyone else. Brother, don't do anything to Zhou Chengwang, all right? She lifted her face and looked at him. I want Gu Mei to be happy too. She won't be happy. His fingers pinched her chin. Zhou Chengwang likes you. How could she be happy? Shui was stunned. Don't mention this to me again. I can only guarantee that if Gu Mei doesn't betray the company, I won't do anything to her. He didn't say the rest of the sentence, but she understood. She wanted to beg him, but she knew it was useless. She felt a chill run down her spine. So it was really because of her that Zhou Chengwang's family had become like this. Really? Do you have to do this? Cher looked at him. Brother, in your heart, my feelings aren't important, right? As long as I stay by your side obediently, I won't be angry no matter what you do, right? Stop fooling around. He comforted her patiently and turned her face. Previously, you tried to please me on purpose and didn't resist me. Was it because you wanted to beg me on behalf of Zhou Chengwang? No. She bit her lips and got angry. You're obviously being unreasonable when you deal with him. Yi Mu-yun laughed coldly. Then do you think it's worth it to fight with me for another person? Cher closed her eyes. Then I won't go out in the future. I'll follow you when you go on business trips, all right? She had already lowered her stance. She was willing to walk into prison because she remembered the look in Gu Mei's eyes before she left. So that was how it felt to love someone. She hoped that Gu Mei could get what she wanted. Originally, I only wanted to bankrupt Glory, but now what I need to do is not just this. Yi Muyun's voice was cold. I don't need to imprison you. I just need to make Zhou Chengwang disappear from your world. Yi Muyun pinched her chin. Do you understand what I mean? Cher's heart was heaving up and down. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. You want to kill Zhou Chengwang? She held her breath. Yi Muyun smiled faintly. There are many ways to destroy a person. Snow looked at him as if she was looking at a stranger. After a long time, she finally said, I can't tell if it's because of your ambition or because of jealousy. Or maybe you and I are from two different worlds. It was the first time she had spoken to him like this. Yi Muyun narrowed his eyes. Is there really nothing under your eyes or under your surveillance? What can there be? His little girl mimicked him and sneered. Are you going to sit in the back seat of his car? Or is he going to New York to look at me from afar? That's all. That's why you want to drive such people away from me, right? She felt that even breathing was painful. Do you not believe in me? Or do you not believe in yourself? Or Cher spat out two words softly, pervert. At that moment, it was as if time had stopped. Yi Muyun stared at her for a long time before smiling. You've grown up. He only said these three words before he carried her up and placed her on his lap. His handsome face was filled with madness. Didn't you say that you were willing to give yourself to me? Now, I want to see how much you can sacrifice for Zhou Chengwang. Chapter 2037. With that said, he pressed her down harshly and kissed her on the mouth. It was like a storm, without any hesitation, as though he was going to devour her. She endured it, and it was almost painful. She cried softly, but nothing could stop him. When he tested her, she finally cried out, no, no. He stopped abruptly, but he still hugged her and buried his face in her neck. Does it hurt? He was in pain too, but she couldn't feel it. Cher was still lying on the bed, looking at the ceiling. After a long time, she said, do you love me, or is it because of your possessiveness? She slowly sat up and curled up her bruised and purplish body. Her whole body was trembling slightly. Yi Muyun's eyes hurt slightly as he looked at her and said hoarsely, possessiveness? Is that how you see it? I've been possessive of the 8-year-old you since I was 10 years old, right? Her lips moved, but she didn't say anything else. The sweet atmosphere of the past 2 days was broken by Gu Mei's appearance. They were like two hedgehogs, guarding against each other and not getting close to each other. The moment they got close, they would be stabbed by the other party. Yi Muyun looked at her with a pained expression. He pursed his lips and pulled down the blanket, choosing to use violence. Otherwise, he would definitely kill her and hurt her. He lay down while she sat up. Even though the temperature was not low, her body would still feel cold after a long time. She curled up her body and looked at his back view, her eyes blurry. She was angry, but he was even angrier. She was conflicted. She was sure that she liked him and wanted to spend the rest of her life with him. But could such a one-sided submission support them for the rest of their lives? She didn't know. She only knew that it was too cold and lonely on such a night. So, this was how quarreling was. It wasn't pleasant. As the night deepened, she curled up and bit her lips, enduring it alone. But she didn't regret it. Sleep. Suddenly, his voice rang out. Then, her little body was pulled down by him, and she lay behind him. His body was very warm. It was so warm that it tempted her. Shui tried her best to control herself from hugging him. She wanted him to hug her, but he didn't. Half an hour later, she couldn't take it anymore and hugged him from behind. This hug carried the pain of the two of them. It was not a reconciliation, but a kind of surrender, a kind of emotional surrender. It's not that I approve of your methods. I'm just cold. The little girl sniffled and said dryly. Yi Muyun didn't say anything. He just turned around and held her in his arms. He had long arms and legs, and she had small arms and legs. It was perfect for her to be in his arms. On such a night, They hugged each other to digest the hurt brought by their first fight. She drifted off to sleep, and he kept his eyes open until dawn. She said that he was a pervert. Cher, is that what you think of me? When Cher woke up, she was already in Pei Yuan's bedroom. His bedroom. She had changed into her pajamas and was lying comfortably in the quilt. There was even a heat pad beside her hand. Her eyes were a little sore. He treated her very well, so well that she didn't want to run away. She slowly sat up and looked at the sunlight outside. Her eyes were sore. Chapter 2038. On the other side, Gume was silent for a while before she opened her mouth. Her voice was filled with despair. I understand. Cher, I understand. Cher sighed. Gume, can you come back? I'll try my best to think of a way. Cher, you don't know how people who have been in the dark want to have the light when they see it. Gume smiled weakly. It's not your fault. I'm the one who made things difficult for you. Cher pursed her lips. She wanted to say something, but Gume had already hung up. Beeping sounds came from the phone. She was in a trance and felt sad for Gume and Zhou Chengwang. She called Tang Yu, and the call was quickly picked up. It was Tang Yu's voice. Xin, what's wrong? Dad? Xiaoxin's voice was soft. Can you ask brother not to buy glory? Tang Yu, who was far away in France, frowned and thought for a while. The company's affairs have been handed over to Zhao, Yi, and Mu Yun, but it's a multi-billion-dollar case. Normally, the shareholders need to vote on it. Cher pinned her hopes on him. Tang Yu smiled. But I've already signed the documents. Then, he said, but you have 20% of Boyi's shares. I don't think Mu Yun asked you to sign it. As a father, he doted on his daughter the most. He was willing to give up billions for his daughter. Cher was surprised because her father also doted on her brother. It wasn't his usual style to make such a decision. But her father had said it, which meant that he supported her. At least, he wouldn't stop her from exercising her rights. So for a moment, she couldn't digest it. She was dazed for a long time and didn't come back to her senses until he hung up. In France, Tang Yu put down his phone and his eyes fell on Pei Chi. She looked at him. Tang Yu smiled faintly. The two little ones are having a conflict. Pei Chi nestled on the sofa and looked at him. Then why did you encourage Cher to go against Mu Yun? Tang Yu walked up to her, put his hands on both sides of her chair, and leaned over to look at her. Don't you think there's something wrong between them? Mu Yun cares too much. In the end, the one destroyed by this love is not our Cher, but himself. Hearing his words, Pei Chi sighed inwardly. She reached out and hugged his neck. Her breath smelled like orchids. Aren't you afraid that they will fall out? If they fall out, it means that their love isn't mature yet. Tang Yu smiled and picked up his wife. Pei Chi bit her lip and avoided his kiss. It's still early. I don't want to sleep. But I want to sleep. Tang Yu chuckled and kissed her lips. At the same time, he put her down. Pei Chi avoided his kiss. But how could she avoid it? In the end, she hugged his neck and said shamelessly, You're already old. You should control yourself. The word old completely made a man in the prime of his life become a beast. Tang Yu's beautiful lips covered her ear. You think I can't do it? No. Pei Chi hugged his waist and flattered him. Hubby is the best. Perhaps she had pleased Mr. Tang. He didn't do it fiercely, but treated her gently. He was so gentle that Pei Chi was about to cry in the dead of night. She lay in his arms, soaked in sweat. She asked softly, Will Cher and Mu Yun break up? Chapter 2039. As the person in his arms fell asleep, he said in a low voice, Mu Yun loves Xiaoxin as much as I love you. How could I bear to let go? Be city, Pei Garden. Cher did not go to school. Instead, she chose to eat and sleep in Pei Garden for the whole day. In the evening, Mu Yun gave her a call. Knowing that she was at home, he smiled and said that he would be back soon. After Cher hung up the phone, she walked barefooted to the living room and curled up on the sofa to watch TV. The TV was playing the financial news. She did not know if she deliberately watched it, but anyway, she watched it. Her eyes were glued to the TV, and she could not bear to leave it. About 10 minutes later, the The situation of Boyi's acquisition of Rongwang was broadcasted. She saw her brother, Zhou Chengwang, and Gu Mei on the screen. Zhou Chengwang returned to Rongwang and became the department manager. Gu Mei was his secretary, and she had been accompanying Zhou Chengwang. Compared to Gu Mei's experience, Zhou Chengwang was undoubtedly immature. When facing the camera, he still had a trace of indiscernible helplessness. But Gu Mei, like a tough woman, guarded him. Cher watched, and her eyes became a little warm. Was this what Gu Mei wanted to protect with all her heart? Why did Gu Mei not find a stronger person, but chose Zhou Chengwang? Was Zhou Chengwang the light in Gu Mei's darkness? Cher hugged her body and watched. Her eyes were a little warm. On the other side, on the top floor of Boyi, Gu Zhe saw Gu Mei coming out of the elevator and reached out to stop her. His eyes were dark. Gu Mei, you can't go in. Brother, I want to see Mr. Yi. Gu Mei's voice was calm. Gu Zhe narrowed his eyes and stared at her. Gu Mei, are you crazy? Do you think I don't know that you took the documents? That's the company's secret. It's also Mr. Ye's painstaking effort. Do you think he'll let you off if you steal it? Gu Mei lowered her eyes and smiled lightly, but her voice was a little choked. Brother, your faith in Mr. Yi is the same as my faith in Zhou Chengwang. Is it the same? Gu Zhe sneered as he looked at his sister. I was convinced by Yi Muyun's high IQ when I was in university. He's younger than me, but he's way above me. But what about Zhou Chengwang? He's not a businessman. He should be playing the piano. Are you sure you want to support such a person? Gu Mei bit her lips and did not make a sound. All right, let's take 10,000 steps back. If he succeeds, do you think he will repay you by marrying you, or will he marry someone of equal status to strengthen his business empire? Gu Mei, you and I both know that a wolf can't be tamed. Gu Zhe continued. Also, the result of Mr. Yi letting Rongwang go, or should I say, if someone has to bear his anger, it'll be you. Stealing confidential information means going to jail. Do you know that? There was a touch of helplessness in Gu Mei's eyes. She did not make a sound for a long time. It's fine if you want to help Zhou Chengwang, but don't do stupid things. Gu Zhe's voice was a little strict. Think about who you're letting down if you do this. Are you letting down Mom and Dad? Or are you letting down me? He was a little mocking. No, you're letting down Zhou Chengwang. But when you're in jail, maybe Zhou Chengwang is already engaged or married. Have you thought about all these? Gu Mei shook her head. Brother, don't say any more. Really, don't say any more. Chapter 2040. Gu Zhe's voice was firm. Gu Mei, come back with me. It's still not too late. I'll send you back to America. You can start a new business there. Listen to me and destroy the information. Then, pretend that this never happened. Gu Mei shook her head gently. It's too late, brother. Gu Zhe frowned. He was shocked. After a while, he turned his head slightly and saw Yi Muyun standing there quietly. He didn't know how long he had been listening. Gu Zhe, go back to the office first. I have something to talk to Gu Mei about. Yi Muyun's voice was very soft. Gu Zhe stood there for a long time and didn't move. Based on what you said just now, it's not difficult for me to send you and your sister in together. Yi Muyun's voice was calm, but there was no warmth in it. In the end, Gu Zhe still left first. Mr. Yi, Gu Mei looked at Yi Muyun, her voice a little soft. Yi Muyun looked at her deeply and turned to enter his office. Gu Mei hesitated for a while, but still followed him in. Once she entered, she saw Yi Muyun standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. His body was sideways. The setting sun shone through the window, leaving a faint golden glow beside him. Have you thought it through? Yi Muyun asked calmly. He reached out to light a cigarette for himself and took a long puff. In the smoke, she couldn't see his expression clearly. She didn't dare to see his expression clearly. After all, she was indebted to him, but she betrayed him. Gu Mei nodded slowly. Yes, very good. Yi Muyun looked at her and asked quietly, what about the information? Are you going to use it to threaten me? Or sell it to my opponent? Gu Mei took a step back and looked at him warily. I won't lock you up, and I won't harm your life. I won't do that, even for Gu Zhe's sake. I just want to give you one last chance, Yi Muyun said and paused. Gu Zhe's suggestion is not bad. At that moment, Gu Mei almost cried. She had followed Yi Muyun for a long time. How could she not know his style of doing things? When was he so benevolent? Was he giving people a chance to repent? But he gave it to her. Mr. Yi, there's no turning back. I've fallen in love with someone. Gume choked with sobs and said, I don't want to see him fall. I don't want that ray of sunshine to turn dark. Then you'd rather destroy yourself, right? Yi Muyun's expression was cold. There was something hidden in his eyes that Gume couldn't understand. If Gume could understand it, she would know that it was Yi Muyun's last kindness to her. He had once treated her as his sister. Otherwise, he would not have let her accompany Cher. But she, with her sunshine in her heart. Finally, Yi Muyun said softly, erase the information, and I won't pursue the matter. In the future, your life and death will only be related to glory. Gume looked up. There was hurt in her eyes. She knew it was ridiculous. She was the one who was going to use a weapon to hurt him, but she still felt hurt. Because from now on, she had been completely abandoned. Abandoned by Yi Muyun. But she still had to fight to the end. Just like what he said, her life and death were related to glory, and glory's life and death were also related to her. Hence, she used the information to make a request. When she said it, she knew in her heart that if she succeeded, she would go to jail. She was so calm, but in the end, she couldn't stay calm. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.